Good evening.
Good evening.
Please forgive my unsteadiness. I never had an opportunity to get back my land legs. For over 95 years, I've looked out on this river, a reminder of how I lost my life to the sea. I'm Dr. William E. Minahan, and this is my sister Daisy.
Hello.
I had a well-established medical practice in Fond du Lac in 1911, but I had close ties to the city of Green Bay. My brothers Robert and John were surgeons, and Hugo and Victor were Green Bay attorneys. We grew up in a family of Irish descent in Chilton, 5 brothers and 4 sisters. My sister Daisy had been sick for some time when my wife Lillian and I agreed that a trip to Europe might provide her some relief from the constancy of her poor health. We didn't realize at the time that Doctors Hargrove and Macaulay, also from Fond du Lac, were leaving on their own separate trip to Europe. Well, we had a wonderful time as a family. We traveled throughout the continent. We stopped in Killarney, Ireland to see where our parents had grown up. While touring Italy, we had to rush back to Paris, France, so I could operate on Daisy for an attack of acute appendicitis. Eventually, we were really quite ready to return home. But upon arriving in England, we discovered that our passage home had been canceled due to a coal strike. We were profoundly fortunate to book first-class passage on a brand new liner of the White Star Line. Due to her advanced hull design, she was deemed unsinkable. They said even God himself could not sink her. She was called the Titanic. Her accommodations were such as to lift the spirits of everyone, elegance and comfort in every way. Well, we had departed for home on the night of April 14th, 1912. We attended a wonderful banquet hosted by the ship's officers, and at that banquet were many dignitaries, including Colonel John Astor. It was his grandfather, John Jacob Astor, I'll get the name right. John Jacob Astor, who, by foreclosing on the properties of the Grignon family, John Law and Jacques Corlier, came into possession of half of the east side of Green Bay at the time. Well, around 10 p.m., Lillian, Daisy, and I retired to our stateroom, weary from our travels and from the evening's festivities, and we soon fell asleep. It was in about an hour and a half that we had been asleep when the great ship grazed hard against an iceberg in the North Atlantic, and it left a series of gashes some 300 feet long in her hull below the waterline. Given the promise of the great ship, no one thought to awaken us, and we slept on another hour and a half. Daisy was the first to wake up. Daisy was the first to wake up when she heard the scream. We immediately got up and rushed on deck, dressed only in our night clothes and a few blankets, and everything was in a state of confusion. One could hear cries and shouts everywhere. The bow of the boat was already quite low in the water, and it was clear we had to act fast. And I pushed Daisy and Lillian towards one of only 2 remaining lifeboats, lifeboat number 4. We didn't argue about separating at that moment. On the lifeboat were going to be 2 crewmen and 50 women. I simply said, "Be brave, my dear. No matter what happens, be brave." Daisy, perhaps a bit reluctant to leave my side, was encouraged by the curt invitation of a harassed ship's officer who said, "Damn you, get on the boat!" She did. Colonel Astor and I stood at the rail and waved goodbye to our loved ones, and then stood resolute to await the fate that we knew would befall us. It was 1 a.m. in the morning. At approximately 2:20 a.m., we could feel the final shuddering of the great ship as the bow dropped beneath the surface of the waves. The stern rose high in the air, the lights went out, and one could hear the cries and screams of some of the 1,503 people still on her decks. And the Titanic plunged to the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. It was some 2 weeks later that they recovered my body and that of Colonel John Astor. And I was brought back here to Green Bay by my brothers. And sometime later that my wife built the mausoleum that you see on the hillside behind me. Daisy and Lillian were, of course, in the lifeboat. And about an hour later, you could see rockets rising from the decks of an ocean liner, the SS Carpathia, on its way to Italy, but now turned and yet an hour and a half away, but coming to save the surviving passengers of the Titanic. And on board to minister to those passengers were Doctors Hargrove and Macaulay from Fond du Lac, shocked to discover that among those passengers would be Lillian and Daisy Minahan. Were I only able to thank them for their kindnesses of that night. Lillian and Daisy were among the 704 survivors of the worst peacetime marine disaster in maritime history. My dear Daisy, having survived the freezing temperatures of that night, yet only lasted another 7 years. She died 7 years later due to a recurrence of her illness, no doubt made worse by the experiences of that night. Thank you for coming to hear our story. And as you leave, please be a bit cautious. I tend to wander around a bit at night and I leave puddles of water everywhere, and I don't want you to get wet feet and catch a cold, not after a lifetime of caring for the sick. Thank you.